Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day and welcome to another video about the Wizard101 test row. Today, I wanted to talk about a change that literally happened yesterday, but I think this is a really massive change. Basically, right? Every utility that deals with overtimes and every spell that does double damage with overtimes, like Thundering Djinn, for example, all of them have been changed just a little bit. And honestly, this is a very good change because until now, a lot of these spells were not usable. So let's talk about this change, what it might mean, all the things that are coming in this update. Because honestly, I think this is something that will make some schools better or worse, depending on what they are. So let's talk about it. Let's get right into it. So previously, what ended up happening is that every time that you made an overtime, the way that these 3-pip spells used to work is that the number of rounds that overtime lasted varied based on how many things that you affected. For example, right, let's take the fire spell Oni's Forge. It can clear up to 3 shields on your enemy, and then it creates a heal on yourself, right? And what it used to do was that, let's say you cleared 1 shield, you'd have a 3-round overtime. If you cleared 2 shields, you'd have a 4-round overtime. And if you cleared 3 shields, you'd have a 5-round overtime. So no matter what, you're only ending up with 1 overtime when you used to use the spell. So that means that, let's say that you had no other way of healing. Let's say that you didn't carry something like Sprite. You would have to do this twice in order to set up for something that required 2 heals on yourself to do double damage, like Thundering Djinn. Now, it's not even like better, it's way better. Basically now, it always creates a 5-round overtime, and it can create multiple versions. So now, let's say that I were to use Oni's Forge on 1 shield, I get 1 5-round heal. If I do it on 2 shields, I get 2 5-round heals. And if I do it on 3 shields, I get 3 5-round heals. Now, what I find really interesting about this update is the fact that now, all the overtime spells, they haven't changed accordingly. They are still based on 2 overtimes. So if you have any spell that's overtime related, you'll notice that you'll only still need 2, which means you could literally use this spell on someone that has 2 shields, and you have 5 rounds to set this up. Now, if that sounds absolutely busted, that's because if you don't pack counters for it, it might actually be very busted. I think one thing that I really like about this is that spells like Energy Transfer and Djinn's Restoration, which were really kind of ass for Storm, now they actually mean something, because now people are like, if you're on, I don't know, if you're on a life, if you're on a storm, if you're on a fire, you're gonna want to put heals on yourself to do a life scion, a fire Oni, or a storm Djinn, and they're pretty easy to set up. Let's say that I have Volcanic Shield and someone uses this 1 spell on me. I'm already in danger of getting, I'm already in danger. So packing things that actually counter overtimes is gonna be really good. Now, Storm is just one example that I gave, but I think the schools that are gonna get affected by this the absolute most are definitely going to be Fire and Life, because they have more overtime conditionals than anybody. And what we're going to probably start seeing is, one, I think Oni's Forge is going to be one of the most used spells in the meta. And also, I think Infernal Oni is going to be a monster now. I feel like this is by far one of the easiest high damage Onis to set up. The only other Oni that's comparable, in my opinion, is the Storm one, but you need 4 weaknesses on your opponent. That's a guaranteed 2-turn investment. If you can set this up in 1 turn, and you run pip conserve, you're looking at an insane amount of damage for a low amount of pips very quickly. There's also obviously Scion of Fire, which is much better now, because let's say that you use a spell like Meltdown, right? Let's say someone has 3 shields, you clear 3 shields and you add 3 5-round overtimes, and as long as you run pip conserve, you're ready to set this up pretty much immediately. I think one very good thing that's going to come out of this is schools that are not really overtime oriented, that were given an overtime conditional, now they have a viable way of doing it. Like, at least for Fire, you guys might have seen that other video where I actually used it. At least for Fire, yeah, you could have technically just elved twice. You could have technically just linked twice, and then I guess you would have been ready to set up a Scion. You might have been ready to link twice and set up an Oni. But there are some schools that simply don't have really good and usable overtimes for low pips, right? Like, for example, Storm, for them to do their healing conditional Djinn, they would have had to Sprite twice. That would have been the best way to set it up. Maybe healing current into a Sprite. It's very, very unreliable though, and that's why I think this change is good. I think my favorite part about this change is that there are a couple of schools that do not deal with overtimes basically whatsoever with their utilities, and they just so happen to be the strongest schools in Wiz right now, in my opinion. I think right now Ice and Myth are very, very good, and you'll notice something when you go through their spells. They do not have anything that counters heal overtimes. They do not really counter damage overtimes either. I mean, I guess Myth has shift, but when we're looking at 3 things, like 3 overtimes on you, 3 heals, you can take a look at their spells. None of their spells countered this, right? I mean, Delusion counters weaknesses, Betrayal counters shields, Jinns counters shields. When you start looking at actual overtimes that do a lot for your conditionals, when you're looking at spells like Scion of Fire and Infernal Oni, when you're looking at those doing a lot more, that by definition weakens schools like Myth. It by definition weakens schools like Ice. I'm gonna be honest, I was a little scared that those schools did not actually need masteries in order to actually compete with everybody, and they could just do the same old thing that they've already done. But I think if you find the right mastery amulet that can counter as many things as possible, then you actually can counter any school in the game right now. What I am really thankful for is that they did make the gambits 4 overtimes, because technically you would think if it follows the same trend as all the other ones, right? Like, for example, let's say that it followed the trend of, you know, this one, the Caldera Jinn, right? You'll notice, yeah, all of them require 4 things on your opponent in order to do double damage. The thing is, traps you can literally use for 1 pip or 2 pips, and you're almost ready to do it already. And not to mention, there are 0 pip ways to add traps. You can literally just use a regular trap, right? You don't technically have to use a fuel. You don't have to use, like, I don't know, an elemental trap. So a lot of these 4 pip conditionals were easy to set up without putting pips into them. I think the best example of these are the shield-based conditionals. Like, if you look at the Scion of Ice, right? Yes, you technically do have utilities that can give you shields. There's a lot of them, right? There's Wall of Blades, which is really, really cool, right? It can give you 3 shields. There's a lot of them. There's actually a few that Ice was given. There's I don't know, I think there's Glacial Fortress. You can do a lot of stuff with shields, right? You can clear weaknesses and make shields on yourself too. My problem with this is that if the overtimes were they required 4 overtimes, it's so much easier to set this up. You just set shield a couple of times, and if you do an off-school set shield, you're already ready to set up a Scion. So I think the fact that you can naturally set some of these overtime ones up by maybe alphing twice, linking twice, spriting twice, that kind of thing, or using some of these new utilities, that makes these very, very viable. And it also makes us, as schools like Myth, schools like Ice, they can't run simple decks and just do what they always have done. Don't get me wrong, I really like shield-based conditionals, I really like blade-based conditionals, the weakness-based ones, but by our experience and how we tend to play PvP as, you know, PvPers, these are much, much easier to set up. I think the fact that overtimes are a part of it now makes every school, like, you need a give and take. You might actually, on a death, for example, you might actually want to use Contagion, for example. You might actually want to use Oni's Morbidity. These actually might be good spells to use, and up to now, they weren't even mildly useful. I'm really excited about this update, y'all. I honestly think it's gonna feel really, really intuitive. I think there are some schools like Balance that can do a lot in this meta, but they can literally counter everything. So stuff like that's gonna be interesting to see. I'm very excited. I think every school got something that they can use to compete very, very well. I've had many, many games that are very close. I've had games that are shutouts. It just depends on how you play. And I think right now, we're at the dawn of a new age where there's more strategy than any time else. Let me know what you guys think of the overtime changes. Do you guys think it's too much? Do you guys think you're going to be using these spells? And do you think every school has viable counters with at least a mastery amulet? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to see y'all's opinions on this. This is kind of a huge change. It actually makes literally, I guess, a third of the spells that we just received much, much better than they initially were. I believe it's 6 spells, right? 3 overtime heal spells and 3 overtime damage spells that are conditionals that are now way, way better than they used to be. Let me know what you guys think. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave us something if you're new. And as always, if somebody has not told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. So stay awesome. And yeah, y'all.